Hello, my name's Julian Edgar and I'm the author of the book you see in front of you, Custom Air Suspension. What I want to do in today's video is cover 5 misconceptions about aftermarket air suspension, the ability in your road car to give you the best ride and handling. And yet, very few people seem to understand that it can give you the best ride and handling. Let's look at our 5 misconceptions. The first one is air suspension's just a gimmick. Well, is that the case? Lots of people use air suspension as a gimmick, but lots of people do not use it in that way. Here's one manufacturer, Porsche. This car's fitted with air suspension. They're not using it as a gimmick. Here's another car fitted with air suspension, a Tesla Model S. They're not using it as a gimmick. So what these manufacturers, and I could also add Audi, I could also add BMW and a range of other manufacturers, what these manufacturers are doing via air suspension is giving the very best ride and handling that can be achieved in road cars. They're not using it as a gimmick. Next misconception, air suspension is soft and bouncy. Well, is it soft and bouncy? Here's an AMG Mercedes. It runs air suspension. There it's 4 air struts. Is an AMG Mercedes soft and bouncy? No, it's not. So, firstly, the soft bit. Well, the spring rate of air suspension, air springs, can be altered in much the same way as the spring rate of steel springs. You specify the spring for the stiffness that you actually want to achieve. And in fact, air suspension, you can even change the stiffness on the go. So, stiffness of air springs does not have to be low at all. What about the bouncy bit? Well, bouncy means that the damping wasn't set to match the air springs. Now, if you pick air springs that change a lot in spring rate, like donuts, then you're going to have problems getting damping that's a good match. But if you use air springs of the sort you can see here, rolling lobe, rolling sleeve airbags, or air springs, then damping's not nearly a problem. So it's the way the system is set up. Air suspension is only for big cars. After all, I've shown you only big cars so far. But the reason that manufacturers largely fit air suspension only on big cars is because they can amortize the cost more easily, because it's a more expensive system than with steel springs. So if it's an expensive car, then it makes less impact on the overall cost. But technically, air suspension, in fact, is more advantageous for lightweight cars. Here's an 850 kilogram car. I've got one of these, a Honda Insight. I run air suspension. Why is it advantageous actually more in light cars? Because the proportion of load, the proportion that load makes of the total mass of the car can more easily change. So you've got a bigger percentage of mass getting on board and off board, and because you can hold the same height with air springs, it's actually more advantageous with lightweight cars. Misconception number 4, all air springs are the same. And a lot of people seem to think that air springs are just squashy bags, and that's simply not the case. Let's have a look here. These are donut airbags, convoluted airbags. I am not a fan of these. These change dramatically in spring rate as the spring gets compressed. They go up really fast in spring rate, and they often don't even have very much travel. But often people think, well, they're air springs. That's what you get. Here's a different type of air spring. This is a rolling lobe air spring. This is much more like the ones that are used by Porsche and Tesla and Audi and BMW. This is an aftermarket strut conversion. I run these on the front of my little Honda, and they are very, very effective, much more effective than donut airbags. So air springs are not all the same, and if you believe that is the case, please have a look in my book and you'll see how I describe some of the differences and how significant those differences are. Air suspension is expensive. Well, is this a misconception? In a way, maybe not. Air suspension is going to be more expensive than a conventional steel-sprung car, but there are ways to make it cheaper. So this is the back of my little Honda with the bumper cover off, and on the left we have a BMW X5 compressor, and on the right we have a Porsche Cayenne air tank, and both of those parts were bought second-hand fairly cheaply. The total cost of air suspension on this car, it was certainly more than with steel springs, but not dramatically more. Not if you source the components carefully and if you choose to use second-hand parts. I like using these second-hand parts because the original equipment manufacturer quality of these parts is also very, very good. So, 5 misconceptions. Oh, and another one before I leave you. This is my own valve block that I made up to control heights, and I'm simply using little eBay 1/4-inch valves. So even the valve block was done fairly cheaply on this car. 5 misconceptions of air suspension. If you're after the best ride and handling and you want to open your eyes to what is possible and also open your eyes to what major original equipment manufacturers are doing, I suggest you have a look at this book. It covers the technology of air suspension. It also covers fitting air suspension to your own car on a budget, and it talks about some of those really important things like different designs of air springs. They're not all the same. Thank you.